All right, and we are live. Well, let's get ready for a conversation with Brother Coleman. Wow, it has been a long time. And I want to first and foremost apologize to everyone. I want to apologize to Apologists in Detroit for, procrastinating and dragging my feet, getting this stuff taken care of and getting this content put out. But better late than never. And now is the right time as we get ready to go into a new year. We're gonna kick off the end of the year with this, a conversation that I knew was bound to happen. But yeah, we're gonna do it big with Brother Coleman. But before we get into that, man, just want to say what's up to everybody. Want to welcome back my friend and colleague and mentor, Apologist in Detroit. How you doing, bro?
Oh man, I'm doing well. I'm living life on the edge. I'm dangling my feet. I tried to pay attention, but attention paid me.
There it
That's
is.
a Little Wayne line. You didn't know. He
Now,
said he
now,
say haters can't see me, nosebleed seats. And today I went shopping and talking still cheap.
now he remember as many Bible verses as he remember lyrics. So don't try him. You know what I'm saying? Don't
Right,
try
right.
AI because he'll get with you. But yeah,
Yeah,
like
he
so.
just need to
What are we
take his
talking?
meds.
What are we talking about today? We're gonna be, there was a conversation that took place, I believe, last week toward the end of last week, and I was getting ready to put out a review of Vocab Malone's very entertaining, gentleman-like dialogue with Unc, the real black atheist. But but this right here popped up in my YouTube mentions, and I could not help myself because Coleman Hughes is a guy that I felt like most of the apologists in the UA had to keep an eye on, and uh, he's a fairly young guy. He got to be in his early 20s. I know he's younger than 25. He might be about 23. And I just felt like he was a guy that we had to keep our eye on. I first came across Coleman Hughes uh, about a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when they were having some hearings regarding reparations. And Coleman was on the anti-reparations side, and he came in and kind of gave a speech and was arguing against what reparations. And I knew who Ta-Nehisi Coates was. They had quite a few different people. So Ta-Nehisi Coates was there. He was arguing for reparations. You even had Danny Glover arguing against reparations. You had quite a few people. You did have some other scholars there making their case. But I'm like, okay, so who is this guy, this young dude arguing against reparations? And come to find out, like I said, it's Coleman Hughes, and he was a notable writer for Quillette, which is like an online magazine. I want y'all to keep also this in the back of your head. He was a fellow up until last summer of the Manhattan Institute. Now, the Manhattan Institute is also the same conservative think tank that Christopher Rufo works for. And I'm not trying to do no guilt by association, but it's a think tank. So that should let you know something. But this conversation popped up, and Dr. SeanMcDowell, that's a brother in Christ, love him. And he interviews. Of course, y'all know how he get down on his channel. He'll interview different people. We've heard people with different perspectives across the spectrum regarding this issue of justice come on his channel and talk. But I was very interested because this is a young man who who Dr. McDowell says that he listened to quite often. And, I often wonder what's the, like, what is it? What is it about Coleman that attracts, or what is it about his content that, grabs our white brothers and our white Christian brothers and sisters? Because I'm gonna keep it real. I'm listening to I do keep an eye on his channel from time to time because I understand that this is part of the calling that God has given me. And there might be some stuff that he says that I agree with, might not be some stuff. But I'm listening to his stuff the same way that I might listen to a Richard Carrier. I'm just keeping it real. Because I understand what's out there. But what you got to say before we get into the conversation? Because I'm gonna give a little bit more background on Coleman.
Yeah, I looked it up. He's 25 years old, which is odd because he was born after I graduated high school. So I graduated high school, he was born, and that just makes me feel old. Anyway, as for Josh, I don't have. Well, first of all, I don't have a huge. I don't have much of an opinion on Coleman Hughes because I've 4 or 5 interviews with him. And so I haven't. While I know that I disagree with him uh, on worldview aspects when it comes to racism and things like that. There are some areas that we agree on. He seems to be at least reasonable enough to see certain things. So I feel like maybe he's thinking, maybe he's kind of thinking and trying to figure things out. The process, he's doing what kind of everybody does today, which is kind of share their opinion. And so, I'm not mad at him for that. I mean, Sean McDowell, not Josh McDowell, but Sean McDowell, on the other hand, I often see when he interviews people like Eric, people of that ilk that are kind of thought leaders, popular level thought leaders when it comes to kind of Christians who gravitate towards social justice, biblically defined, and things like that. He often posits it as though he is still thinking about these things and thinking out loud. But the fact that he seems to interview 2 to 1 people like Coleman Hughes, people who are kind of anti that, that leads me to believe that maybe he's not thinking as much as, or maybe he's not as it is, particularly when he talks to people like Hughes and seems to imply that he agrees with them and he listens to them frequently. So for me, it's kind of like I feel like he's kind of crossed this. He presents himself as a person who's been processing, and we're kind of along for the journey. But it feels like at this point that he's kind of made land, which is fine. Even if it differs from mine, I respect that. But in that regard, by saying that he's kind of thinking out loud, I think it comes more across as more propagating of him actually thinking out loud. Just one critical, critique of Sean McDowell. But other than that, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Hughes gave some very intriguing responses to the questions that he was being asked, and a lot of helpful. There's some information that we can add to the conversation to help people to reflect critically about it. Hopefully after we're finished, we can share this over there in the comments of that post, and some of the people who are over there commenting, that's a much busier channel. We'll get some critique from them and push back to them the of on this notion of justice and where justice truly lies in the scope of God's economy. So, thanks. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you once again, my road dog. But just a little bit more about Coleman. Coleman recently, I think he's been out of college with his BA in philosophy from Columbia, okay, which is an Ivy League, so he's no slouch. But he says himself that he grew up in the suburbs, really had friends of all different kinds of races or nationalities, things like that. But he's come to be a bit of an expert on this issue of race. So let's go ahead and hear what Mr. Hughes has got to say. And so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And
we have a video. Mr. Hughes talks pretty slow, so we got the video on 1.5 speed. So it may be from time to time feel like Sean's talking kind of fast. That's why. But I think that on all of the responses, Hughes speaks so slowly that the increased speed is going to make him speak at a very normal pace.
All right. So if you can hear it, just give me a 1. But we're gonna go ahead and get started.
Is you buck the trend in a couple ways on your views. Number one, you're an atheist. Now, I would venture to say probably that's a minority position within the Black community. Historically, the church seems to have been very important to the Black community, but also you seem to hold views about race and maybe politics that would be at odds with the larger Black community. First off, am I right about that, broadly speaking? If so, is either one of those harder or more challenging to navigate just as an intellectual or as a person?
That is a great question. Many different ways to answer it. So, interestingly, I would say if you look at the total U.S. African American population, my views on politics are probably less controversial than being an atheist still. Like if I went to the average Black family reunion in South Carolina, probably my being an atheist would be more of a minority position than the things I would say about racism.
Okay.
Now, the reason that may be surprising to people are thinking, well, no, come on, Coleman, like so many more people, if you were saying systemic racism is not as big a problem as they say, racism is exaggerated, that the problem is culture, so many people would push back against you on this. That's true, but far fewer people would push back.
You just let me know when to stop if you hear something you want to address, Chris.
Against that in private than would in public. I mean, again, if you like Black Americans, Black Democrats are far more.
Did you say stop?
That I'll let you know when to stop. You can probably finish his answer, and then I do have a short comment after he finishes answering the question.
Okay.
Conservative and white Democrats in their beliefs on pretty much everything. Even though.
All right, so I do got something to say right off the back. And and he's talking about how he bucks the trend, and that's the attraction. So what trend are we talking about that he's bucking? Well, one, I didn't mention this young man is an atheist. And atheism, it is a taboo amongst African Americans. It's a taboo. Now, you might find some African Americans in the conscious community. One guy that Vocab Malone is getting ready to debate, his name is Tahuti. That's the name that he goes by. But, he's into nature worship and things like that. He believes that Horus was a real person. And you might have some other Black people into Yoruba. But you have a majority of Black people that are not atheists, that they are Christian theists. So this is indeed a bit of a taboo. What is also being asserted as being a taboo is this bucking of the trend of pushing back against systemic racism. And as you can hear, he says that you can talk to Blacks within South Carolina, and they'll push back against the notion of systemic racism. I don't think that's entirely true. I think what's being confused here is whether or not a person can demonstrate that systemic racism is still around. I don't think that we should confuse a person's ability to give a cogent argument for systemic racism with the fact that they may not believe that systemic racism is around. And furthermore, he goes on to say that these Blacks will readily admit that there are some issues with culture, but they just won't say it in front of white people. Well, here's the thing. Me and Chris talk all the time, and as a Christian public theologian and apologist, I'll readily admit when there's cultural issues available. You're going to hear some cultural critiques going all over the place tonight coming from me. And I don't have a problem saying it in front of anybody. But what I refuse to do is let the other entity or party off the hook. I refuse to do that. And so what we don't want to do is make bad faith arguments and things like that. And a lot of times when these cultural arguments are levied, one, it's a form of identity politics, and two, these are bad faith assertions and arguments. You got anything, Chris?
Yeah, I do. Basically, yeah, I think that he gave a fair response to that. I do think that the atheism is much more of a taboo topic than the race, or than politics in general. The reality is, with the advent of social media, I know more Black conservatives than I knew, politically speaking, than I knew 20 years ago. With you get the Hughes and the Candace Owens and many other of these. I forget this woman's name, but at the moment, this other woman's name is Shani something. I can't remember her last name. Yeah, there certainly seems to be more Black conservatives. So I don't think it is nearly as taboo for Blacks to have more conservative views. As a matter of fact, most of my Christian social circle that are African Americans hold predominantly conservative views when it comes to abortion, when it comes to some of the financial positions and things like that. So that's not, or as far as taxation and things like that. So yeah, I think that it is less taboo. The issue where I would say is this: I think that it is. I think that it's more taboo to have that conversation, which I think is what he said, to have the conversation from the perspective of a Black person, to have a conversation about race. Black. I'm going to even narrow the conversation even more from the perspective of a Black Christian. I think it's more difficult to have a conversation with whites, whether they're Christian or secular, partially because of the lack of empathy and sensitivity that they often speak on the topic of racism with. Often they come to people with a very with their own worldview, which is fine, whatever they believe about that. But I think they have this lack of empathy when it comes to want you to listen to them, but they don't want to listen to you. There's this assumption from often everybody, both sides, to think that they know. And I just think that for Christians, that's a very unchristian way to behave. James 1:19 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." And I think that we'll all benefit from that. We're all Christians who want to genuinely have conversations about the topic of race with people of other nationalities or with people of other races will benefit from us being willing to submit to this ethic of Scripture, to be quick to listen, so to speak, and particularly white people, because the reality is, as historically speaking, not speaking of the present per se, just for the sake of discussion, historically speaking, as the people who are the descendants of the victims, it really disrespectful to just come at a conversation with us with this very with this often parental talking down, like I got to educate you type of attitude. I just think that's it's unwise and it's unhelpful. And it is more helpful, generally speaking, for you to be willing to listen and in order to facilitate the conversation a little bit. So yeah, so that's what I would say.
That's so excellent of a point, and it's so true. Most of the Black people that I do know are for are pro-life. A lot of conservative values, traditional marriage, traditional marriage, pro-life, but a certain wing of a certain party, a lot of blacks feel that this particular people group don't want to have anything to do with them, refuse to listen, refuse to, like you just said, talk it out from a position of empathy, but you know what I'm saying? But only want us to listen, so to speak. And so I would totally agree with you. And I mean, just once again, just get to know, get to know black people. When this craziness that's going on within on the left, most black people I know don't approve of that mess. No, not at all. But there are other existential issues at work, and and it's more of a pragmatic question of survival as to how we go about living our life. And so, but let's keep listening real quick.
Yeah, another quick, real quick follow up comment. Like, to me, like there's certain finger quote secular woke ideologies that are pervasive in the arts. I'm talking movies, I'm talking television shows. Most of my black Christian friends, we all complain about that. I literally was watching when I was on Facebook earlier today. I saw who quoted, and this is just his comment. He said, woke ideology is ruining cinema, and he was referring to his perspective watching the new Matrix movie. And again, like I don't know, like almost universally, all my black Christian friends would agree with that comment, not necessarily about the Matrix, but about art in general. It's pervasive. They're constantly shoving these ideologies in your face, and from a Christian perspective, it's anti-Christ, and therefore, we oppose it. We don't like it any more than they like it. So, this notion of like we hold like a completely liberal, like a Democratic Party position. I mean, that's antiquated. That's old. It's outdated. It's untrue. And you would know that if you actually were friends with us, talking to us, listening. You'd recognize that. The fact that when often these people, these brothers in the Lord, come to us with this parental mindset of I'm going to come and help this uneducated person, or uneducated on the topic person think more clearly. I just think that's arrogant. And again, James 1:19, we got to do better. Have some humility. Approach these conversations with the genuine desire to listen, and maybe guide a conversation through asking questions instead of you trying to present a narrative that potentially, particularly with me, more often than not, is a mistaken narrative. Like, I study history, so when you come to me with a shallow narrative, I'm gonna shoot holes in it pretty quickly, because I study history and I study culture, and I'm aware, and I can cite academic sources for you to be able to go and read and understand that history has way more nuance than you thinking at this moment.
Good stuff, Chris. Good stuff.
Black people vote 90% for Democrats as a bloc. So there is this phenomenon which John McWhorter has also talked about of in the black community, you're supposed to talk one way in public and one way in private. Privately, you can acknowledge that, okay, over 60% of kids born out of wedlock, like nothing is going to happen until the family structure is remedied, and it starts in the home, and all of that stuff. None of that stuff is actually controversial in black only spaces. It's controversial to say it publicly, where quote unquote white people can overhear, because then you're airing dirty laundry in public, and you're a traitor. But the thing about being an atheist, less true than it was probably in my dad's generation, is that that is still taboo privately and publicly. That's taboo in every sense. Does that make sense?
That does make
I mean, yeah, let's talk real quick about the family structure. Now, I'm a firm believer that the family structure is important, is quite important, but it's very hard to separate these structures apart. So you have the family structure, you have the structure of government, and you also have economics that has implications for both. And I was talking to one of my white co-workers at work, and when you as a parent have to work 3 and 4 jobs, both parents, a lot of times both parents, when both parents have to work 3 and 4 jobs, who has time to be at home with the children? Who does? And these are for pennies on the dollar. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say that a part of this discussion is let me start with an anecdote. So I was talking to a friend of mine last year sometime, and he basically kind of retorted to me, to one of my comments of, well, why are all these black guys having all of these babies with all of these women all over the place, and not marrying and being fathers, right? And so I said, because I'm pretty close friends with this guy. I said, well, how many of those guys do you know? And he said, none. And I said, how many black people do you know? And how many of them are married? And he said, all of them. And I'm like, because I knew some of the black people that he knew. And I'm like, all of us married. All of us go to church. All of us, the husband of all of us are faithful husbands to our wives. All of us are faithful fathers and parents to our children. I'm like, your experience is the exact opposite of this stereotype that you've heard. Yet some reason this stereotype is burned into your conscience, and it's real, and it's a part of the problem, even though it's completely completely ungrounded, as completely ungrounded. And part of this is because there may have been a time where that statistic was actually true. Part of the problem is that the way the statistics work is you take a survey today, and then you sift through the data, you factor in all of the handicaps, all of the different ways that data have to be sifted out in order for you to get the most balanced and accurate data. And then 3-4 years later, you actually get those statistics. So part of it is the problem is this delay in how we interact with statistics. So we're constantly talking about yesterday. In real time, we're constantly talking about yesterday. And so yeah, this is part of this is where I would say that Mr. Hughes, to me, it's like, there is progress being made even culturally for African Americans. There are marriage rates are going up, along with a lot of the other statistics surrounding African Americans in the family. The reality is that the data has it so that we can understand more clearly where we're at today, which we won't until tomorrow, and then we can continue to work toward making progress as far as fixing some of these issues. So yeah, I think that was worth noting. The reality that often we're dealing with data that at times can be antiquated because hard data is usually from yesterday, and yesterday is usually 5, 10 years ago. So yeah, I think that's good. That's an important point.
Yeah, data does matter. And just like what you just said, who do you know that's having all these kids? Well, here's the thing. In this conversation, you're gonna hear some complaints about what the media prioritizes. I would also say that, whether it be left wing or right wing media, you often see the most negative portrayals of black men and even black women. Now, when that's constantly bombarded at you, it's quite disgusting. But I'm glad that even in your conversation, you just pointed out, like, how many of these dudes do you really know that's having all these babies? The only time I ever see it really is when I'm watching when I used to watch Maury and Jerry Springer. But even Jerry Springer,
it wasn't just us.
No. So, I would say that the media plays a role in capitalizing off of, and trying to paint an image of an irresponsible black male who needs paternal guidance and things like that. But I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit.
I got a comment for the 16-minute mark. So
Okay.
if you shoot there, and then while you're shooting there, I'm a piggyback on what you just said. Like me and my boy Brandon, you know, we both movie buffs. You know, we love going to the movies. We love you know, how art communicates and displays human culture. So you know, but we often, like me and him, you know, we have this it's not really a joke per se. It's a running joke in a sense that it's like you know, there's this recognition that there's this issue. Like when we watch movies, and I like you to, I like you all, the listening audience, to start doing this. When you watch a movie, how often is a bad guy a guy of color? So you have all of these roles in it. You have leads and you have supporting actors, and then when you just have like random henchmen, how frequently is there a minority random henchman? And then how frequently is minority random henchman beat up or killed on screen? Because he's not a main character, you might not think about the subconscious, the effect that this is having on our subconscious, on our psyche. Constantly seeing that, constantly seeing of color played in these roles of villains, or these roles of people who are bad guys or making poor decisions and things like that. But the reality is that's you know, we have to realize that psychologically speaking, you know, all different forms of art, music, the things that we read, pictures, just like still painting pictures and things, all of it, you know, has an impression on our psyche and contributes to our behaviors on the whole. It might not be always a direct one-to-one correlation. I heard this one song and I went out and did this behavior, but accumulation of hearing songs that say the same thing, and then my behavior often will become shaped by that. The same thing with the movies. You know, if the most prominent roles that African Americans receive in these movies are consistently, oh, he's a pro athlete, a very minuscule number of people throughout in the world end up becoming pro athletes. So that, but this is what you're putting before us, and so this is what our people aspire to, or we're drug dealers, or our henchmen, and or we're constantly seeing that Black lives don't matter, in the sense that these people are constantly being killed. You know, and just go watch, just pick a movie, pick a TV show, and watch, and start to note the time, how frequently Black people are portrayed as henchmen of bad guys, henchmen of bad guys, dirty cops, and how frequently they're getting arrested, how frequently they're getting killed. Even in like big blockbuster movies, you'll see often even if the villains are alien, they don't have black skin. Like think the Chitauri on Invasion on Earth. It's intentional. It's intentional in the sense that our society has a long track record of depicting things in this way, and it's just going along with how things have traditionally been depicted. But you have to recognize that these traditions, a lot of them were established in the history of this country when racism was the norm, and communicating a negative about Black people was intentional. So even though it might not be intentional today, it might just be following the traditions that have been laid out before them over a long period of time. The lasting and lingering effects of constantly saying these things play a huge role. So this point that you were just making in the psychology, the psychology of the media presenting us in certain ways, and that continuing the perpetuation of some of these characteristics and behaviors in our culture, that's a huge piece that needs to be explored more and factored in when we're talking about the problem of racism, contemporary racism in our country.
Got it. All right, let's continue.
For making the occasional stupid joke, but when I got to Colombia, and even before it, I started encountering this really strange, different trend that has gone by the social justice, wokeness, all of these names, which basically said, really for the first time in my life, your race makes you a special victim. You have to lean into your racial, gender, sexual identity as much as possible. Make it the most important thing about you. Notice every micro example in which the way the world might be unfair towards you as a result of your identity, some of which are real, some of which are imagined. and really just center that as in your social and psychological life. That's a way of being that no one in my family had really taught me to modeled, but I got it from from professors at Columbia, from other students that had gotten it from professors or from Tumblr, from the internet. And so it's this kind of new identity you could take on as a noble victim, essentially. Only insofar as you had an identity card to
You can pause it there.
to cash out with.
Yeah,
Right.
and I thought this was important on a variety of levels. First of all, this is his first exposure to it. I think you mentioned that he grew up middle class, like New Jersey, right? Middle class. And like I know from my own personal experience, I grew up raised by a single mother on welfare. During the my childhood was during the 80s, during the crack epidemic, the war on drugs. I literally can't even remember or account the number of houses of drug busts that I've seen, where I literally see the SWAT team pull up in the van, get out, surround the house, and then take a battering ram and batter down the door, go in, see people jumping from second story porches trying away from the police. I can't even account how many times I saw that. As a contrast that with the upbringing that my children had. We've been lower middle class. So for my kids, haven't seen it. I was raised by a single mother on welfare. They were raised their entire lives in a 2-parent household. They've always had a parent to help them with homework. They've always had, they've never had to worry about violence outside of their front door, because once Detroit became violent and our concern was for their welfare, we moved out of the city to the suburbs, and we moved to one of the most it's like we moved to the equivalent of Fresh Prince moving in with Uncle Phil. We moved into one of the more affluent neighborhoods in Michigan. We rented a condo there, but by doing that, our kids went to one of the best school systems. They weren't bullied. They had a very good experience growing up in school. Other than to have the experience of that, to me, if you can be and interview them and talk about our worldviews are going to be a little bit different, because we experience things slightly differently, over the scope of our life. That said, what stuck out to me is his going to school and being ignorant. And then like later on after, if you continue to what he was playing, you don't have to, but you guys can watch it on your own. His response to this awareness was to start a podcast. I mean, here's a person, and he doesn't specify whether or not he began to inform before he started the podcast. He just presents it in this interview as though he started to notice how other people saw the world differently, and saw, in his words, centering their victimhood as kind of as a lens through which to live their lives. And his experience wasn't that, so he just starts a podcast and starts speaking otherwise. And it's like, well, do you even consider the fact that maybe it's why they see things a little differently than you? That reminded me of this passage in Malachi, when Malachi opens up. This verse 2, I have loved you, says the Lord, but you ask, how have you loved us? That's verse 2. If you go on and read that passage, Yahweh wants to tell him how he's loved them, how he's protected them. And they're completely to this, and they think that God has basically abandoned them or forsaken them, and they think that their way of thinking is clear and justified, because in their mind, God's abandoned them, when all along, God's been faithful to them. And I think that that's a part of, as Christians, what I'm trying to do in these responses is to remind us that as God people, we have a calling to act different things in the world. So we have to recognize that there's a potential for us to actually not have a blind spot and not see this thing clearly. And in light of that, be willing to listen and understand and learn, and not simply arrogantly respond because your experience in your mind is different than theirs, thinking that only your experience is true, and only your experience is correct. So that said, I think that as you alluded to earlier, all you gotta do is just kind of go to the U.S. Census website and start to look up the statistics for just about anything. Who's in prison? What is everybody's income? Who has jobs? Just look at virtually pick your subject, look at the data, and what you're going to consistently find is that there are disparities that African American average. Those disparities are so out of whack, like often 2 to 3 times the average population are these disparities are the disparities that we experience. You don't think that that's going to have a you don't think that that's going to influence on the way that we view the world? Particularly when you consider the fact that these statistics have never been balanced. Got to remember, for the first 200 years of this country, racism was the norm, whether it was de jure, the law, or de facto, how the government allowed others to treat us, nothing about. That was the norm. Disparities were the norm. And when the laws changed, when abolition took place and freedom was, just because the law changed didn't mean people's citizens' behaviors or our experience changed. Our experience was still that of disenfranchisement and disparities. When the law changed from freedom to civil rights in a hope of equality, the laws changed, but people's actions didn't. In schools, we were still being terrorized. They still killed Martin Luther King years after the Civil Rights Act law passed. Martin Luther King was still marching on Washington, D.C. They were still burning buses of people at these events to protest. So I think it's important for Mr. Hughes to reflect on the fact that his own personal experience is just not. And the reality is we all have blind spots, right? So what we have to do is to be willing to sit down and engage and do the hard work. And we're talking about 250 years of history. We're talking about a very vast population, hundreds of millions of people, and how that population affects these various dynamics. But again, the reality is, at the end of the day, the statistics have never been fair. They continue to be there's continued to be significant disparities, and what has changed is the laws changed. Our society has significant degree grown in the sense of in the past there were many more people who were racist and opposed Black people's presence on jobs and school campuses and other places, and marrying their children and things like that. There's way less of that going today. But unfortunately, the statistics talk a little bit more about why these statistics likely exist today in a little bit with one act later on, still exists. And then one other point is, these things aren't ancient history. Civil rights was 1964. We've all a bunch of people from 1964. Those are our parents. Those are our grandparents. Now, if your parents, your grandparents experienced racism that like we see in the movies, right? If they experience that, what do you think they're going to teach us? What do you think they're going to tell us? Do you know that we have this thing called the talk? And this thing called the talk is about how to act when you get stopped by the police. Do you know why that's the case? Because our parents experienced that. Our parents experienced the more harsher and out of fear for our lives, prepared us so that we could potentially avoid becoming Emmett Till. That's what they did. So what Mr. Hughes has to realize, he's 25 years old. I would encourage him to be a little more patient in drawing your recognize that this is, I mean, we're talking about 250 years of American history for us Christians. We're talking about 2,000 plus of biblical exposition and commentary and helping us to understand what exactly the biblical ethic is. And you're talking about trying to balance these two things. And then ultimately, we're also talking about sociology. We're talking about parents counseling their kids and telling them kids things based on their experiences. Three vast streams of information that needs to be finely balanced in order for us to have a very and truthful understanding and positions on these things. So I just want to encourage Mr. Hughes, be patient. Gotta have some long suffering. Let's be more gracious. And he does seem to be to some degree thinking. Later talking about the police, he does seem to rightly recognize some of the statistics surrounding that. We'll talk about that then. Yeah, thanks. I know I went on a little long on that one, but I thought this was a valuable point to point out with him, kind of revealing that he contrast of his opinion was to people that he was some ideas that he was exposed to in his college years, and with people who came from different backgrounds, and that's something that needs to be considered.
And I'm gonna let him finish what he has to say, but I'm going to expose an inconsistency here as well. So let's let this brother finish, and we'll move forward.
And the whole thing struck me as I understood what was seductive about it, but it struck me as a pose that was not based on any real oppression. And and I can really say that of the kids that did it at Columbia, where I was, it was a pose based on zero actual oppression, right? Like the most privilege you could possibly have to be on Columbia's campus, to be in the top 1% of students that go to the most elite university, in like the safest time there's ever been to live in New York. It's amazing, the opportunities at our feet. And many kids were speaking as if they were.
Okay, and then after this, skip past this and go on to the next time mark that you want to, because we're gonna be here all night. With that, we're almost an hour in already. What I want to say is, I'm on 3 different college campuses. I'm a missionary. Those of you who know me know that I'm a missionary. So, part of what I do is I go on college campuses and I talk to students. I realize he's talking about Columbia University, and Columbia University just means you're smart. It certainly doesn't mean that you come from a wealthy background. It might mean that you're more likely to come from a wealthier background, but plenty of people go there for collect student loan debt in order to get an education at a prestigious university. That said, as a person who's on a lot of college campuses, I'm on 3 different college campuses regularly since school kicked back in September. Everybody's experience is not the same. There's some students that come from Flint, Michigan, where they don't have water. They got to boil their water and drink bottled water because their water infrastructure system is broken. And poverty is the demographic in Flint. And I've run into a bunch of kids from Flint when I'm on Wayne State University. You know what I'm saying? And I run into a whole bunch of other kids who since they've been in high school been drinking Starbucks. You know what I'm saying? They can append to that. So to me, just because a kid is on a particular university doesn't mean that there's some general demographic that you can apply to them and assume that these people have never experienced something that you experienced, something that didn't experience. So yeah, I just thought that's I thought that was very broad. That was way too much broad brushing for him to assert certain things about other people when multiple universities is completely different. The gambit that you're going to run into on these campuses of experience and background that people come from. Some people are. Many kids that have come from my church end up, as soon as they qualify to get a apartment off campus, their parents pay for them to have a camp apartment off campus. That's privilege. It's not a bad thing. I'm just simply saying that experience, that privilege points out that they come from a different experience and perspective. And you can't assume that your experience and perspective is universal. That your experience and everybody had and should be judged by, and therefore we should all come to the same conclusion. And the reality is, the more privileged you are, less likely it is that others have had your experience. Therefore, you're probably the one with the jaded perspective. Because when you look at when you look at the statistics on the census, you're going to realize the average person in America doesn't live a very privileged experience. They just don't. Regardless of race, the average person in America doesn't experience a very privileged experience. That's a very small amount of people who have that.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead and jump forward to your next timer when you finish.
Yeah, we're gonna jump forward. Now you just you heard him talk about his college experience, how people were basically tapping in on some of the benefits of their identity, and what comes along with tapping in on these benefits is a type of privileged status. Now, I'm not going to play the clip right now, but I mean, Coleman Hughes pretty much admitted that he didn't, for the most part of his life, even up almost to the point where he got to university, he didn't identify as Black. He said that it wasn't until he realized that there was more social capital to be gained that he started identifying as Black, because there was more social capital to be gained. And social capital is a concept that was coined by Dr. Glenn Lowry in his dissertation. And social capital is like, hey, opportunities, partnerships, hey, sometimes it's about who you know, not what you know, that type of social capital. And he said that when he saw the social capital that was able to get, he said it was more beneficial for him to identify as Black rather than being half Puerto Rican and half African American. But right here, and I'm just a messenger. Right here, we got a little bit of virtue signaling. I digress. But let's skip ahead. And then this next clip, because here's the thing. SeanMcDowell didn't really bring him on here to talk about Jesus, but he did ask him a few questions. SeanMcDowell doesn't listen to him for his atheist perspective. And I'm not picking on Dr. McDowell. I'm just keeping it real. Dr. McDowell listens to him for his political insights. And let's just keep it real. I mean, the dude is only 25 years old, didn't grow up in the hood, really just started talking about race when he got to the university, but he's an expert. And he just started identifying as Black. But right now, we are getting to a question that's important, and these questions have to do with morality. Let's just hear it real quick. We're about to pick up the pace, but let's just hear, because this issue of morality is important, especially when we talk about politics. And politics has to do with governing the right way. And you're not going to hear me or Chris Bryan Samuel get up here and tell you who to vote for, or get up here and tell you what politics you should subscribe to. The politics that we think that you should subscribe to is those of the kingdom, and those and the kingdom is a political movement. Let's just keep it real. Jesus is the saving king. The Messiah is a political figure. So of course we're going to always push the kingdom. But let's just hear what he has to say about morality, because this right here is going to govern a person's approach for everything else that flows from it. So let's just hear it real quick.
That's something we could come back to. I appreciate that honest response from you. Two other questions about religion, and we'll jump back to some issues of race. Is oftentimes, as you know, I'm sure you've taken a ton of classes on philosophy that intersect with religion and metaphysics. One of the big questions is where morality comes from. And I could simply ask you, do you believe in objective morality? On an atheist, how do you ground this? But I want to kind of approach it through the back door and ask the question, why would something like racism be wrong on an atheist worldview? Now, before you answer that, I want to make sure nobody hears me saying that I think atheists are more racist. Not my point whatsoever. You and I are talking about what's called the grounding problem. Where does right and wrong come from? Does it actually exist? Do we have moral values and duties, etc.? So that's the question I'm getting at through the lens of kind of race. So I guess as a Christian theist, I'd answer this by saying God made us in his image. We all have value, and we're called to love one another. and racism is an act of impartiality, mistreating somebody that we shouldn't treat that way. That would be like a quick Christian theist response to why racism would be wrong. And I realize that raises a ton of other questions, but how would you approach and answer that as an atheist?
Yeah, so I guess a couple ways. One would be that ultimately, as an atheist, I ground questions of right and wrong in the notion of human suffering and human flourishing, which I think are concepts you don't need God or religion to understand the general shape of and to be motivated by. So that's where I would, what's good is what increases human flourishing, and what's bad is what decreases it, what increases suffering. And broadly speaking, racism increases suffering, definitely in the long run. And when it comes to what is the reason we should treat people the same, well, scientifically, we are all of the same species, right? People didn't understand this for a long time. They actually thought people of different races or literally came from different branches of the evolutionary tree. But we understand that to be untrue right now, and it's illogical to treat people differently because of their skin color, and it's immoral because you are increasing the sum of human suffering in the world by mistreating someone for bad reasons.
It's a great concise response. I have one follow-up that would help. I think you and I would agree on the importance of human flourishing. I would look at human flourishing and say there's a God who made us and intends for us to flourish as human beings. So there's teleology and purpose built into the universe. Where does my obligation come from to care about your flourishing or somebody else in a universe without God?
So where does your obligation to care about my suffering come in?
Yeah, or somebody else's. Is there actually an objective moral obligation to care about human flourishing? If somebody decided they want to be like Machiavelli and the Prince and just kind of deceive for personal gain, what obligation is that person breaking?
So I think the word obligation is confusing me a little here, because at face value there is none, right? As an atheist, an obligation literally is, it kind of implies somebody out there making you do it or telling you have to do it, but there's no one out there that is going to tell you you have to, save the drowning baby that you're walking past rather than get your shoes wet, even if it means getting your shoes wet, right? There's no one in the universe, I think, that is going to tell you have to do that because I told you it's your duty. Nevertheless, I think we have a duty to our fellow human beings and animals, because we know that they're capable of suffering just like we are, and that if it's in our power to help, we absolutely should do that. If should means anything, we should do what's in our power to help the people around us. And I do think it comes down to a rule that is in Christianity as well as Buddhism and other places, that you want to treat. You understand that people are similar to you, and you want to treat them how you would want to be treated.
So one more question.
All right. Well, I mean, right here we can see the irrationality of a secular worldview, because here's the thing. He said there is no obligation, and human flourishing is something that he arbitrarily, picked. And the reason why I say it's arbitrary is because it's his opinion. Now, it was the founder's opinion that African Americans were slaves and that they should count as 3/5 of persons when it come to how they would tally up representation. That that was their subjective opinion. So essentially, what Coleman Hughes is pushing is a narrative. But this narrative has no grounding, no basis for moral obligation and moral values and duties. I mean, okay. What about the white supremacists or the black supremacists? We do have those. We have them. I'm gonna keep it real. And I mean, what about living? If ultimately, I mean, he gave some answers to some earlier questions that we had to skip toward. Pretty much we live in a chance universe. So what's wrong with exploitation within the chance universe? I mean, like, what's wrong with that? What was wrong with crack cocaine being pushed into African American communities? Let's just keep it real. Black people did not have the ability to get crack cocaine over here. And if you dig a little deeper and do some homework, you will see that our wonderful president Ronald Reagan had a role to play within it as well. Let's just keep it real. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but like, but if might makes right, and if we live in a changed universe, like, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with it, Coleman? I don't like it. Okay, what you got, Chris?
Yeah, you know, okay, he's a philosophy major, so
Yeah,
you know, he initially he sounded like he understood the question. He says, I don't know how to answer it, you know, because in reality, there is no grounding. Answer done at that point. Like, there's nothing else for you to say because, as you just rightly admitted, there is no grounding. It's just opinion. In which case, the implications of that is everything that you just mentioned. Why are we? Why are you here? Why are we talking about anything? Why does anything matter to you? But he goes on to kind of talk about. He goes on to continue with his response and says that human flourishing is this principle and implies that there's virtue and vice within this with this notion of human flourishing as this principle, even though he's already admitted that there's grounding for his belief. But in light of his belief that human flourishing is a virtuous principle, y'all know me, I'm always talking about human flourishing because I think that it's such a valuable I think it's such a valuable concept to think about with God. And that said, you know, Mr. Hughes, you know, if you like human flourishing, you should check out Christianity, because Christianity, the God of Christianity, is all about human flourishing. Here's a passage for you. Psalm 92 verses 12 through 14. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh green. Or how about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? I come that they might have life and life to the fullest, or life more abundantly, as some other translations say. Mr. Hughes, if you think that human flourishing is a principle that matters, then you should consider Christianity. Just thought I'd help you out there.
yeah. I mean, just like Sean pointed out, this human flourishing is not some arbitrary virtue that we're selecting. Um, that we're selecting through a colorblind neoliberal lens. No, this human flourishing has teleology, and this is grounded in the fact that human beings have value based off of how they were created and who they were created by. And so, yeah, I mean, somebody pointed out that this brother is pro-choice, talking about human flourishing. And once again, that requires to be pro-choice, that requires the quote unquote dehumanizing of another human for the flourishing of the person making the choice, I guess. But he's getting ready to finish up this answer real quick, and we'll move forward.
Mention Christianity. Do you have an opinion
quick,
this around seasons around?
I was gonna say, Shadi, he let him pass because he wasn't there to have that conversation, and I think that he was just being a gracious host and not, you know, trying to, you know, switch the topic of the discussion. So I didn't really take it. I didn't really take it the wrong way when he didn't press him up on that. I thought that he was just trying to be kind and sticking to the topic that he had him there for.
Yeah, he brought him to talk about race, not necessarily religion.
Yeah, I think McDowell uses the word race like 100 times in this interview that's like an hour long. So I'm pretty sure race was the reason that he brought it.
And we'll let him finish up his statement, then we'll go forward with the next segment of this interview. And y'all get ready. Is America a racist nation? That's coming up next, right after this.
Hitting your thoughts about who Jesus was, and
y'all forgive me. I got commercials. I'm gonna skip right past this and we'll just go to the next. All right, so we're getting ready to go to is America a racist nation?
To race. And I've heard you talk about this on your podcast, asking other people, but I'm curious how you would respond to the question, is America a racist nation?
So that's an interesting question. I like to start from the perspective of the world, which is, so let me start this again. There are two ways to answer that. One is to compare America to other places in the world in terms of how much racism there is, and to see where America lies. Right? Is America behind the curve of the rest of the world in terms of how much bigotry our people have in their hearts, how much bigotry is enshrined in our laws? The second way to answer that question is to compare America to a utopia you can imagine in your head, where there is no racism, and see that America is horrible by comparison. Right? We have mass shooters, we have mass shooters going into synagogues and killing Jewish people. We have people, writing the N-word on bathroom stalls and all kinds of craziness. I think many people who say America is a racist nation are picturing a country, a perfect utopia in their head, and finding that America doesn't live up to it. Whereas I've always felt the only relevant comparison is between is actual alternatives. And this is a point Thomas Sowell would make a lot. How go live in other places in the world, and you will begin to understand that racism is not an American problem; it's a human problem. It's a problem that comes out of some of our tribal instincts to associate with people similar to ourselves and to view people who look different as potential enemies. And that has also been stoked and geared up by ideologues. But truth be told, America is one of the least racist places on earth, and that some people find that to be absolutely shocking if I say that. But there are places in the world where it's just okay. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
To this day, the colloquial word in Arabic for a black person is abd, which is the same word as slave. And the reason for this is because the Arab world had lots of African slavery, which is never talked about. Millions of Africans were enslaved in the Arab world, starting 1,000 years ago. And so the word they encountered in the Arab world, they mostly encountered black people, Africans, as slaves, as was also true in the New World. So it just became the same word. Now, look at where the West is in terms of reckoning with its slavery. Right? We have the 1619 Project. We have a museum in the nation's capital, partly funded by the government and heavily funded by all kinds of patrons, dedicated to the African American experience with extensive exhibits on slavery. We have, even 50 years ago, we had Roots, which was a documentary that was the highest rated thing on television at the time and was not surpassed by anything else for a pretty long time, telling the story of a black slave captured, brought to America, forced to work. So this is where the West is on slavery. However bad you want to say we are, if you compare the soul searching the West has done on the issue of racism and slavery to elsewhere in the world, it's impossible to say that we're behind the curve rather than setting the standard and ahead of the curve.
Wow.
Right? Because there's no soul searching or social justice worrying about slavery in the Arab world. Right? They're still calling black people abid. So this is what I don't understand when people say America is a racist nation. America is the number one place that people of color around the world want to be. That's a fact. That's a fact of world migration patterns. Right? This is the number one desired destination for migrants of color around the world.
All right. Shall I go forward or shall you? Okay, is America a racist nation? And so if we're gonna answer this question, we gotta have some type of criteria or some way or some standard by which to measure by. Now, he's an atheist. And so we already know that what an atheist is reduced down to. And the atheist is reduced to relativity or subjectivism. Okay. So the first thing that this dude wants to do is compare with other quote unquote other countries. And Michelle Turner points out he brought up the 1619 Project. Well, yeah, I just find that so ironic that he himself, when he was working with the Manhattan Institute, is fighting against the 1619 Project, and you bring it up. It's a bad thing. If I heard you speak a few years ago, this is bad faith once again. But and I don't want to pick on the brother, but I'm just going to point out. But the Bible that I read, and Dr. Sean McDowell should be able to answer this question, whether or not America is a racist country. We don't want to compare it to other countries. What we want to do is measure America up with what the Word of God says. And the Word of God says that righteousness exalts a nation. And righteousness has to do with our relationship with God, and it also has to do with our horizontal relationships with each other as well. And so one need not look no further than the criminal justice system when talking about America. And last time I checked, America it's leading the nation in the number of incarcerated people. And got a lot of incarcerated Black folk as well. And so, I mean, yeah, the Arabs are low hanging fruit. Let's just keep it real. The Arabs make America feel good. When in doubt, pick on the Arabs, right? When in doubt, sometimes the Russians, but the Arabs are low hanging fruit. But is the kingdom of God a utopia that's in our head? Well, I know what Coleman Hughes think of Christians, because I've heard him talk about wokeness being compared to a religion, and when he compares wokeness to a religion, his religion of choice is Christianity. So I already know what he thinks of Christianity. But is the kingdom of God a utopia? Well, Christians have something that we're striving for. And to have a set of standards for the kingdom of God on one hand, and have a set of standards and have a relative set of standards for America on the other, is to create a secular sacred dichotomy where the kingdom of God becomes some type of abstract reality that can never be lived out in practice. And it's unbiblical and ungodly. That's basically how I feel about that. What you have to say, Chris?
Yeah, I think he mistakenly creates a false dichotomy. Like there are more than the two options that he presented of this utopia, this imaginary utopia, or this relative comparison dichotomy that he presents. To me, this is there's a bunch of different things that you have to consider when you're trying to answer this question. My answer to the question is that yes, America is still a racist country. Are they as racist as they used to be? No. Like when abolition took place, they were no longer owning human beings. Well, technically they owning human beings, but over time they stopped owning human beings, and so they were less racist than what they used to be. But they were still lynching people, beating people, arresting people falsely, putting them in chain gangs, underpaying them, and the list is too long to even express variety of different ways that African Americans were still being treated based on their race at the time. But America was less racist. Same truth exists when you consider civil rights. Is America as racist as it used to be prior to civil rights? No. But does that mean that America is not racist? No. I mean, the reality is every time there's a police shooting, the reality of America's racist hearts are revealed, because you get thought leaders going in front of people, making statements. You get Twitter, hundreds of thousands of people liking race on platforms like Twitter. So I think that I think it's hard. I think that the burden of proof to prove that America is not racist is on him, and I don't think that what he said so far is adequate. In addition to that, I mentioned, we have the reality that this is a country that fiercely defends many aspects of its racist history. I mean, we still have conversations on statues of people who were primarily, like Robert E. Lee, who were primarily known for racist, their racism advocacy. You know, why are we debating whether or not we should have a statue of Robert E. Lee when he is predominantly known for for representing the southern states that wanted to the United States because they wanted to maintain their right to own black people slaves, right? Or Stone Mountain. I mean, to me, when Juneteenth, just this past year, when Juneteenth was starting to gain momentum as a national holiday, how many people did you see on social media complaining? I mean, that's a reality. America's still a racist country, and that's even before we get into more hard data statistics that prove the same point. As I mentioned earlier, never been parity for African Americans in America. It's just never been. We've always been disenfranchised and faced, and the disparities in our statistics, go to the U.S. Census, bear that out. It's always bore that out in the past, and those statistics maintain, and in many cases have gotten worse after America has become less racist. So, in addition to that, there's lots of work that's being done on things like policing, talking about when people get stopped by the police, the frequency at which African Americans get stopped in comparison to their population, compared to white Americans being stopped in comparison to their population. It's staggering. The rate that we go to jail, the thing that we face, the plea deals, like the disparities in plea, like the disparities in plea deals. The two people get arrested with similar backgrounds and they both take plea deals. Black people consistently get worse plea deals. It's bore out in statistics in so many ways. I'm not sure at what point a person who doesn't want to acknowledge that America is a racist place I'm not sure at what point that their conscious needs the notion that America is still a racist place. Is it as racist as it used to be? Not at all. There's much more Black people flourishing today, economically flourishing today. There's marriage and families and things like that. There's plenty of that going on. Progress is certainly being made. This is not the 60s. This is not the 60s or prior to that, or the 50s when they're killing Emmett Till for some woman lying and saying that he with her. I'm saying clearly progress is being made, but just because progress is being made does not mean that America is not a racist country. Think of it like this: when we're talking about fighting against racism, okay? Like he said, racism. He goes on to say that racism will always be with us, and I agree with him. It will, because it's ultimately racism is a reflection of human beings being sinful, right? Well, murder will always be with us. So does that mean that when we have problem areas like Detroit or Louisiana or Chicago, where violent crime and murders are out of hand, does that mean that we shouldn't fight against violent crime, that we shouldn't acknowledge that it exists, or we shouldn't say that it's problematic simply because on the whole, murder is down in the country? No. Like racism is not the type of thing that you find some sense of complacency and acceptability with it. Racism is the type of thing that you can, as long as it exists, and if it's going to exist forever, it's a problem and we need to fight it. So on multiple levels, I think that Coleman Hughes is mistaken. This is a country that defends its racist history through its icons and statues and monuments. This is a country that statistics bear out that Black African American people and other Black people who don't even have the history of racism, just here and got the same skin color, experience life uniquely different on average than our white counterparts. I don't understand how he can say that America is not a racist country. Yes, progress is made. America is still a racist country, and we should be content with that.
Very well said, dear friend. Let's keep playing a little bit because he's going to say something that I want to talk about.
And so are we saying, when we say America is a racist nation, that there is still racism in America? Because that's true. I think there will always be racism, probably everywhere on it. I think it will dwindle as people become less and less ignorant, but it will never go away. Just like murder will never go away. Right? Nobody expects a world that is free of murderers and murderous rage. It's to me, it's like saying America is like a rageful nation. Like, do you think that that's ever going to fully go away? No, we can fight it, and we are fighting it. And I think still making real progress in terms of the number of people over time that will really sign off on a racist worldview, right? Really say things like, I don't want my kids marrying someone of the other race, right? We poll people on this all the time, and the numbers have come down, but they're still, for some of these questions, they hover around 5, 10, sometimes more % of Americans will just check the box and say, yep, I do not want my child marrying a black man, for instance. And so I don't, and probably the number of people that think that without saying it is probably somewhat higher, but I don't expect that to ever go away. There's never been a multiracial society on earth without this kind of bigotry. And America and the West in general have been on the forefront of pushing back against that worldview, right? So it to me, it's ignorance of the world that allows someone to say America is a racist nation. And I'm not really sure what you mean by it, if not that.
It's really fair and interesting to compare it to some utopian vision and other nations around the world. Our expectations and how we frame the question is going to shape how we respond to it. In these conversations, the topic that always comes up is police violence against Black people. And I've heard you do full shows on this, so obviously we could spend a couple hours unpacking it. But as you look at that, what are just some of the key takeaways that you have? Is it like, this is a serious issue, needs to be reformed, this is overstated? How do you look at the larger issue of police violence, in particular against Black people?
So basically what I would say about this is my reading of the evidence suggests that Black people and Black men in particular are much more likely to be harassed by the cops, stopped without proper cause, treated disrespectfully. So put that in one bucket. In the other bucket, we talk about people who get killed by the cops, shot and killed. This is where the narrative has gotten totally out of control, and where the media has been horribly derelict in its duty to attend to the data, which is to say, there is not a substantial difference once you account for differences in crime rates between unarmed Black people getting killed by the cops and unarmed white people getting killed by the cops. And the reason if one thinks I'm crazy for saying that, this is partly because the media, the national media, almost never reports it when an unarmed white person gets shot and killed by the cops. Without even looking at the databases, I can guarantee you that in 2021, many unarmed white people have been killed by the cops, and you don't know a single one of their names because CNN doesn't report it, MSNBC, probably even Fox in many cases doesn't report it. It just stays in the local town Tribune in Arkansas, or somewhere.
Yeah, I would agree that there's a problem, but as a former police officer, I'm gonna make a statement about this. I'm gonna pull some rank here. You cannot separate police shootings from from the category of use of force, because deadly force is just another category on the use of force continuum. And here's the thing: if it start out with Black men being disrespected, physically abused, arbitrarily pulled over for things that they didn't do, I'm pretty sure Chris is going to supply us with some statistics as he normally does. And you could just go look at the U.S. Census data. But if it starts out like that, I mean, look at the study that was done in Ferguson because of the Michael Brown shooting, and what that study demonstrated. What that study demonstrated was Ferguson was a place where systemic racism was just running rampant. Now, some people might gripe and say, "Well, it was the Obama it was the Obama administration that conducted that investigation and things like that, so we can't believe that." But see, that's arbitrary, and once again, is denying the objective evidence that came out of that that investigation. And so once again, is America a racist nation? Well, I would have liked to see if we could get a decent definition of racism. Because here's the thing, I'll admit that racism can happen on a personal level, and it can also happen on a structural level as well. And I have absolutely no problem with pointing out structural racism where it exists. And what he's pointing out with within the police department, there exists a culture that disrespects Black people, Black men especially. And let's just keep it real. I've seen so many young Black girls slammed by police officers in school that is ridiculous. A few years ago, there was a young black teenager that was just belly to belly suplexed by the swimming pool in Texas. And we know for a fact that that wouldn't be allowed to happen to a white girl. Not at all. It'll be some folks getting fired the next day. Badges being turned in along with their uniforms being turned in the next day. And so I refuse to separate the two. I don't think that you can separate deadly force from use of force. The very fact that you have police officers pulling the trigger on people demonstrates that, yeah, there exists a certain culture within the structure of the police department. But that culture also disrespects Black people at a higher ratio. And it starts off with verbal commands are a part of the use of force continuum. Open hand control is a part of the use of force continuum. Soft hand control is a part of the use of force continuum. And what that is takedowns, pepper spray, baton. That's hard open hand use of force, part of the use of force continuum. Batons. And then you have deadly force. Well, a baton, then you have the taser, which is another step up on the use of force continuum. Let's see how many people get tased. I would like to look at those statistics. That's also a part. And then you have shootings. And yeah, you have a lot of trigger happy people saying that they fear it for their life. And then you also have a government structure that gives what's called qualified immunity to police officers, where if they take a life, they don't get the same colorblind, quote unquote, treatment that everybody else gets before the law. Oh, hell no. They get a special privilege. I'm interested to see what type of time that this police officer gets for shooting that young man that just got the police officer was just convicted for the crime, for manslaughter. I'm interested to see what type of slap on the hand that she gets, because that's what it will be. But here's the thing. Yeah, yes, police officers do get shot and killed. I agree. And God bless all those police officers who risk their life doing the tough job. It is tough, it's stressful. I get it. But we hire so many police officers in the hopes that, nobody have to pull their guns. That's why you have officers riding 2-man. We would ride 2-man, a 2-man unit in the summertime, so we don't have to pull our guns. So it can be 2-on-1 if things go south. But you mean to tell me you got 2 officers shooting a person over 40 times? What kind of sense does that make? When I was a police officer, it was just a known fact that gun wasn't coming out. If we were getting handled by one person, we should be fired. If we was getting our behind handed to us by one person. I was pepper sprayed in the police academy. One of the drills that we had to do was get pepper sprayed in the face, and then another person would run up and try to take your gun. And the job was to to keep your gun in the holster, prevent it from getting taken while your eyes are burning basically by that pepper spray. And then after you would do that, you run over there while your eyes burning and put handcuffs on the suspect, all while your eyes are burning. But you mean to tell me you got 2 and 3 officers shooting over 20 rounds per magazine, shooting 60 rounds into, like, and it's 3 and sometimes 1, maybe 2 suspects, give or take a few officers, give or take a few suspects. Like, come on. And then when it's time to pay the family, well, guess what? The police officer has a powerful union. I like unions. Okay. When I worked as a police officer, I had a union. When I worked at General Motors, I was part of UAW. So unions are pretty good. But the money doesn't come from the police officer's pension. It doesn't come out their pocket. It comes from the taxpayers. It comes from the city. Like, what's up with that? And then once again, if you kill a police officer, there is an expectation that you are going to jail. I almost said something else. Help me, Jesus. There's an expectation that you're getting ready to take your behind to jail or get the death penalty if you caught. It's capital murder, for Christ's sake. So if you kill a police officer, it's capital murder. But if they kill you, maybe manslaughter. Talk about color blindness under the law. Talk about equal scales. Talk about it. Okay. What you got, Chris?
Yeah. I feel like I'm not accusing him of doing this intentionally, but I felt like it was kind of a bait and switch in the way that he answered the question. The question was asked about racism and policing. And his initial response was, yeah, he thinks that the statistics bear, which is odd because he just in his previous answer, he said that he doesn't think that America is racist. Seems like a conflict of beliefs there. I don't think that America is racist, but yet you consistently think that the statistics bear out that African American people face the space and policing. So just pointing that out, that little contradiction right there out between those two answers. He spent the majority of his time emphasizing this point about police shootings and, arguing the point that police shootings aren't out of hand or they're not rapid or there's not this major disproportion. I have to go back and I cannot find the study that showed that it was a study from like 2020 and 2019. This was after one of the police shootings, and it just showed the raw data. There actually were more African Americans killed. The number was pretty close to the white Americans, but when you consider that we're like 13% and they're like a population, it shows the once again disproportionate disparity that exists, the disparity that exists for African Americans, and it shows that which with it being based on race shows that it's still racist. Even though it might not be based on hate, even though it might not be based on intent, whereas a person is intentionally targeting people because Black as far as shooting people. The reality that more of these people get shot is and that more of these people actually police interactions, which was the actual question: is policing a problem? So one study that has not to do with shooting, but just to do with police interaction. This is one state. This is from North Carolina. It's from a 12-year study done from 2002 to 2014. And it's called Suspect Citizens: What 20 Million Traffic Stops Tell Us About Policing and Race, Cambridge University Press 2018. Remember, statistics usually are a little bit behind. So the study was done from 2002 to 2016, 14 years. And then it was the actual processing of that information took 2 years. 2018 is when they produced the actual report. Let me read a couple excerpts from it. First thing is that driving while Black is very much a thing. It's everywhere, and it's not just a North Carolina or a Southern problem, but across the United States. Schaub says, which is the study. The second thing is that it appears to be more systemic than a few bad apples officers engaged. Significant Schaub's and her colleges analysis of it include blacks were 63% more likely to be stopped, even though as a whole they drive 16% less, taking into account less time on the road. Blacks were about 95% more likely to be stopped. 9% more likely to be stopped. Stopped 63%, 63% of the drivers. Times the drivers that they get stopped. 15% more likely than whites to be searched in traffic stops. 115% more likely than whites to be searched. Again, 20 million stops, one state over 14 years, and the only state. Multiple states have done research on data like these traffic stops, and they bear out the same information that we're targeted. And I think that's why Hughes rightly noted initially that we most definitely do get targeted by the police. That also puts us at a higher likeliness that we're actually going to be shot by the police because we have so many more police interactions. It makes sense that the raw data shows that more of us got killed by police than counterparts who are over three times our population. It's because we get stopped more, and so that's certainly a significant point to be thinking about. One of the something to consider. Policing has a long history. Funny movie, Life, right? Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy, right? But it's depicting reality for its time. Police have been skewed and racist in the sense that their culture, as established, it was being established during a period of time in America where racist attitudes was the norm, and those racist attitudes get embedded in these practices. And part of the problem is we're often thinking about these raw data standpoint and not a sociological standpoint. We have to start considering and factoring in the sociological standpoint and the reality that certain policing practices were established based on the anxiety that you're going to get shot as a black person. I recall a few years back, and it was a black guy. He was an orderly, worked for some place, and he had a white guy that he was caring for. It was in Florida, and the police random stop. Police stopped them. White man had something in his hand. Black guy's on the ground laying with his hands in the air, and the police shoot him. Black guy on the ground laying with his hands in the air, and it's like, why is it this natural fear of black skin as if it's violent? It's a stereotype, angry black men, right? And it's such a stereotype that when we actually in righteous indignation get angry, we're looked at like we're wrong because we have righteous. When white people have righteous indignation, it's celebrated. Think January this, So think of here in Michigan during COVID when people were facing these restrictions of wearing masks and stuff. They grabbed their guns and went and stood on the Capitol stairs and threatened. They literally had a plot to kidnap our governor here. I'm not saying I'm pro our governor. I'm simply contrasting the way that white people are perceived and black people are perceived, and how this sociological the sociological aspect factors into a lot of this. It has to do with the way people think, not necessarily the reality of what people are facing right in front of them at the time. So again, I thought he bait and switched. He emphasized things over policing, and to me, here's how here's one of the main reasons that's problematic, because in the admission of the racist reality that blacks face mistreatment, policing more than white people, is this: You have a lot of people who are interested, white people, SeanMcDowell, white Christians in particular, who are interested in hearing about this. Now all they're thinking about is this narrative about shootings. They're not thinking about the cold hard reality that you initially said, that yeah, the statistics bear out that black people get policed. Black people get policed way differently than white people. They're way more likely to be stopped for the wrong reason. They're way more likely to be handled more carelessly by the police, and that's a big problem. That's a huge problem. That's racism. It's not. It may not be hate. It may be just based on race, but that's racism. That's modern racism. It's prejudice based on race, not necessarily hate. So that was what stood out to me with that answer from him. I got one more study that I'm going to reference when he asks him about that the question of the three bags, what he think contributes to racism most. Because I think this next study that I'm going to reference is, again, on a sociological level, which is a legitimate level to consider, as I've been appealing this entire show, is that where the rubber hits the road, and this is where we really need to do a lot of soul thinking about the problem of racism here in America today, particularly us as Christians. I often say, I got no expectations for sinners. I don't. They don't follow our Lord. They don't have a North Star telling them to love their neighbor as themselves and commanding Christ or God in the way that they live their lives. So for them to, live sinful, that's par for the course for them. That's what we as Christians should expect from them, because they don't have a Lord, or their Lord is Satan, worse, right? But we Christians, there's no excuse for us, man. It's just not. There's no excuse for us not to recognize that when, like Hughes just pointed out, with this racial disparities in the way that people are treated, for us to not care. And not caring is another way that racism is predominantly perpetuated today. Apathy. You know that there is a problem, and because it doesn't impact you, you don't care. That's not loving your neighbor as yourself. That's not 8 and 9 speaking up for those who don't have a voice. That's not God's way to turn a blind eye and an apathetic heart toward a people group who are facing oppression and exploitation. That's not God's way. And yeah, it may just because it's not always the worst kind of exploitation, just because it doesn't impact you, that's not a reason for you to ignore it.
All right, Chris, what was the timestamp on the three bags that you was talking about? You're muted.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to unmute it. It just was taking a second. That is, it's not far from where we're at, because it's one of the last. It's probably going to be at like the 1 minute mark or somewhere around there. Because what is it, like a minute and 15 minute, 1 hour mark or something like that. So shoot around there.
All right.
Right, it's right similar to when he's asking about color blindness as well.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yes, color blindness.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and go.
So I'm going.
You can go color blind. Jump to that.
Yeah, we're going color blind.
Yeah, we got 15 minutes. So
yeah. All right. So get ready to tee him up.
Idea.
Questions about color blindness. What you social warriors talking about? Social justice warrior. What's up, Veda? Good to see you, bro. Talking about Dr. SeanMcDowell,
bro?
Coleman Hughes. He's a fan. Well, I'm gonna be nice.
Yeah.
It's been debated all the time.
I'm not going to even lie.
We should be a colorblind society, and you can define that in an answer.
Go ahead, bro.
Goodness, Gary. I was gonna say, Veda, I'm not gonna lie. It's my dream to have a conversation with SeanMcDowell on the phone with him. Just have a conversation and give him put some rocks in his shoe, as Greg Coco would say.
There you go. All right.
That's been debated all the time. Do you think we should be a colorblind society? And you can define that and answer that however you want to, but we hear debates about whether we should be colorblind or not. Obviously, we think of Martin Luther King Jr. saying, judge by character, not skin color. Should we aim to be a colorblind society? Yes or no? Why or why not?
I think the word colorblindness now has become a dirty word in our society. It's become, if you say that you want to be colorblind, people just roll their eyes at you now. They're like, oh God, this guy just really doesn't get it. He's so stuck in the past. He doesn't understand that being colorblind is actually racist, because you're not recognizing my blackness. You're not recognizing the difference. You're not recognizing that I, as a black person, have been a victim of racism, and you're choosing not to see my color, but I want you to see my color. Like, this is the perspective that I'm hearing a lot right now in the culture. And I think it's a mistake. I think colorblindness, not in the sense of I pretend not to see race. Everyone sees race. But in the sense of I really deeply try to treat people without regard to their race. I try to treat people at the same. I try to treat people in a race neutral manner. And that your race is not a deep or important part of who you are. To me, that's what colorblindness really is. And that's very important. I mean, we all know that this means nothing. Your skin color does not mean anything deep down. And insisting on that is what I would hope colorblindness in the 21st century can mean. There's obviously just a huge wave of people identifying with their race on the left. This comes in the form of racial, sort of like a new strong black identity, strong person of color identity. On the far right, it comes in the form of sort of Richard Spencer alt-right white identity. And to me, colorblindness is just a rejection of those two things. It's just the embrace of just really insisting that the human family is not and should not be divided by color. It's nothing more than the recognition that your best friend or your spouse or your kids can be a different race than you, and that need not be a barrier at all to your relationship or closeness with them. Right? Like, your closest relationships in the world can be with a person of another race. If you ever needed a demonstration that race is superficial, that's it right there. So I think colorblindness needs to update from the "I don't see color" phrase, which is sort of misleading and confusing for people because you do see color, into just the insistence that I don't care about color. I really strive to treat people around me equally. Maybe sometimes I fail, but I try, and we should all try, and we should not abandon the effort, which is what some people want us to do. Some people have become cynical about this issue. They say there's racism out there, so screw it. I'm going to just recede into my race. If you're playing this game, I'm going to play this game too, and I'm going to do it without any effort or pretense at being race neutral in the world. So colorblindness is a rejection of that.
I think that's a great response. I do love that you said we try to treat people impartially, but sometimes fall short. This is the one thing cancel culture doesn't allow. You get pegged a racist. It's all over the internet, and like your reputation in your life is done. What you're saying is let's calm down a little bit. Let's be willing to let people make some mistakes, because there's bigger things at play to have these kind of genuine relationships. So at least that's partly what I heard you say on top of that. I got a couple more for you. One, respect your.
All right. Color blindness. Now, I take issue with the whole notion that my skin color does not matter, that we should strive for a colorblind society. Well, here's the thing. Coleman Hughes is kind of showing his hand a little bit. Coleman Hughes subscribes to what would be colorblind neoliberalism. And colorblindness, many people thought should be the goal of the civil rights movement. But here's the issue. The goal of the civil rights movement was was equality. It was equality, but it was also about repairing the damage that had been done in years of oppression and years of abuse, years. Now, here's the thing: just changing a law, changing the law, changing the school laws for integration and things like that. The school that I graduated from, Liberty University, I think they started out as a private school. And they started out as a private school in reaction to some of those integration laws. sometimes I feel a little shame about that, but also love participating in the group discussions at my school so I can subvert the school a little bit. But I mean, the school that I went to came about because they were pushing back against the civil rights movement and things like that. And people, look, here's the thing. Whoever's listening to this, there's nothing more irritating when you hear folks quote Martin Luther King, judge a person by the color of the skin, the way that the LGBT community quote Jesus, judge not, lest ye should be judged. There is nothing more irritating, and Christians know how the Christians know that that's irritating when that scripture is almost used as a defense mechanism for leveling a certain critique. Well, the same goes when people quote one line from MLK's I Have a Dream speech. I got a big old book back there full of Martin Luther King's writing. I have a book right here by Dr. Martin Luther King called Where Do We Go From Here? And I'm going to read some stuff out of that book before we shut it down, and we're getting close. But my first issue with colorblindness is I've been fearfully and wonderfully created. I didn't just happen by chance. And once again, Coleman Hughes is kind of pushing kind of this, chance, a chance model of humanity, a chance explanation where, this is just, it is, your skin color would be called an accidental property. It's not an essential philosophically speaking. Okay, I get it. But at the end of the day, in God's providential sovereignty, this is the way he made me. That's one. Second of all, color blindness prevents, in principle, us being able to remedy wrongdoings or damages that have happened on the basis of oppression that have affected me based off either my skin color or ethnicity. I think of the Greek-speaking Jewish women in Acts, and what happened in Acts when they were not getting their fair share of help from what the church was giving out, and there was a complaint that was raised. And so, what did the disciples do? Well, they didn't say, "Well, we're just going to try to aim for this colorblind. Hey, let's try to give everybody going forward the same amount. Let's, not make no waves. Just leave everything the way it is." No, they appointed Greek deacons, and you can look at the names of the deacons that were appointed. These were Greek deacons to serve the Greek-speaking Jewish widows. And so you have some representation, and you also have a remedy. Color blindness, in principle, limits the way that we can remedy wrongdoings, and whether those wrongdoings have cascading effects from the past into the future. Color blindness, as a principle, it curtails it. I don't think that's what we should be striving for. Now, should we be trying to divide? There's a difference between dividing and having distinctions. There's a difference. They're not the same. I can recognize that I'm different or distinct from you without dividing from you. I love my white brothers and sisters. Y'all know Dr. Jonathan Pritchard is one of my favorite people in the world. He's a white guy. I appreciate some of the things that he brings, culturally speaking, and also from his unique personality and how God made him. And he appreciates certain things about myself. I was able to connect up with Eric Hernandez when I went down there. He's a cool cat too. And we different. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have to sit there and strive and deny a person's color to affirm. If I have to deny something about you to affirm your humanity, something is really sick about that. Something is really, there is a certain retardation about that that's really bothersome? What you got, Chris?
Yeah. Words aren't univocal, but they're equivocal. It depends on how you're using it. It irks me to no end is how often, and I'm using this as in white people, and particularly white Christians. Again, I don't have any for sinners, but white Christians, how much fiercely they battle over the lexicon of these discussions. It's just like in the last thing when he was talking about the policing business, and within this talking about this policing business, he's focusing on the shooting part of it when he just mentioned that there's disparities, racist disparities, and it's like, well, why instead of us trying to spend all of our time and energy arguing that that the shooting is not a big problem, why don't we spend our time and energy arguing about what the real problem actually is, the real racism that's there? The same thing here. It irks me when they spend arguing over the lexicon and language. It's like, should Christians call themselves woke or should they not call themselves woke? Should Christians call themselves justice or should they not call themselves social justice? Should they advocate for color blindness or should they not? None of that is relevant. If the truth is to be told, what's relevant is what they mean when they say color blindness. If they're saying that we should treat everybody with equality, amen. I agree with you. That's common sense. That's certainly biblical virtue, treat everybody with the same thing. If they're arguing for color blindness, if they're arguing against cultural distinctions, to me, that's a pointless place to place a battle. Why are we arguing about that? In that regard, one of the reasons that some people will argue that's actually a valid reason is because whiteness often gets standardized. I can't tell you how many friends of mine have gone to seminary and noted that they didn't, throughout their entire time in seminary, through any of their curriculum, read any authors of color. The point that's being made is not that authors of color are more valuable than the white authors, or opinions are their opinions necessarily even differ. It's just the reality that why are there, like, if we are a multicultural society, a multicultural world, and equality is a principle that matters, then how is it that we end up with all white scholars is all we read, right? And that happens is because of this history of. There was a time where Black people were simply thought of as stupid simply because they were Black, uneducated, uninformed, unqualified, not critical thinkers. All of these different racist ideologies that people believed about Blacks led to them being marginalized as academia was building. And now that academia, in some sense, has cured and is set and has established their curriculums and traditions, it just so happens to reflect the reality that there's no African American authors. And so when people advocate, say that, like, hey, we should have more, they're saying, well, why are you being racist? Why do you think that it's necessary to have Black people? And they're ignoring the fact that the whiteness from the era of time where those prejudice ideas were widely accepted as the norm, created a standard. It created a standard. And so this is one of the problems that I think that color, it's naive to assume that to not recognize that there are a variety of areas where whiteness has been standardized. Like, how many times, I can't tell you how many stories I've seen throughout the country where there's some private school, and this private school has standards for what students must look like, and you can't have dreadlocks, right? A distinctly African American hairstyling, and it's like, well, why? Why can't a Black? I mean, like, this is something that is within our culture. What is so bad about dreadlocks that it has to be prohibited for us to meet this standard of looks for it? And standard of looks does it standardize whiteness in its stylings? You know, food. It's a variety of different areas that over the course of time, due to the history of racism in this country, whiteness was standardized. And today, when critiques are being made against the standardization of whiteness, not the fact that that being multicultural inherently makes something better. It's really just being like, hey, here's this author over here that has plenty to contribute, but he's not currently a part of the curriculum, because when that book was written, Black people were found. That's where I think we need to just, all I care about when a person uses the term colorblind is, and if you mean that everybody should be treated equally, I'm not going to care whether or not you use the term. I'm not about to fight some battle over the lexicon, with knowing that the lexicon is only going to change over time as words take on connotation anyway. The real battle shouldn't be over the words anyway. The real battle should be road, and where justice and injustices are actually taking place. That's where the battle should be. You shouldn't have a problem acknowledging when whiteness has been standardized, and you should see the standards as inherently wrong. So yeah, that's where I fall when it comes to this colorblind business. Like, I really don't care about the term. Just have the right belief undergirding that term, and then have the honesty to acknowledge that whiteness and oftentimes have been standardized, and that when a person is advocating for others to be considered, it's not because they think that multiculturalism is some inherent virtue. Other people have insights to add and contribute to these topics as well, and they shouldn't be not considered simply because during the time when these things were being established, that was the norm. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would agree with a lot that you said, and I just think that it's ironic how the people who claim, like Michelle Turner just said, people they don't see color blindness until it's time to critique the African American community. Oh, you're having too many kids. The African American community is dealing with fatherlessness. All of a sudden, these are African American issues. Abortion, fatherlessness, crime, joblessness. It's African American issues. What happened to the color blindness? What happened to these being American issues? And to his credit, I think Dr. Lowry tries to walk that fine line, but sometimes it comes out. Sometimes they just can't abide by the standard in which they set. But let's continue. We're almost done. Just a few more minutes, y'all. This is the last part.
Your time. On my show, I've had probably 2 or 3 conversations on critical race theory. I've had a number of other race conversations. Whenever I do that, I tend to hear from some people that the topic, even in itself, is missing the mark of where real injustice is taking place. And it's kind of a way for people, in particular white people, to avoid really dealing with the heart of the issue when it comes to race relations. Now, I've seen and I listened to your interview with Christopher Rufo. So obviously you care about race relations, but you also have concern about critical race theory, if I read that correctly. So as a whole, I know it's a huge topic, but should we be concerned about critical race theory? Should we not be concerned? Why or why not?
So critical race theory, what it really is an academic philosophy that comes out of a different collection of like left-wing ideologies from the 70s and 80s. And without going into it in too much detail, it is a rejection of the colorblind rhetoric of the civil rights movement. Critical race theorists basically said Martin Luther King, all that stuff was good, all was necessary, but it didn't go nearly far enough in its philosophy. And it was far too accommodationist and far too universal in its emphasis on humanity. So what we want to say is basically there's blackness and there's whiteness, there's black values and there's white values, and they're not the same. Our society is built on white values that help white people, and there's no such thing as anything race neutral. You're going to tell me this test to get into college is race neutral? Well, no, it's not. It's actually built to benefit white people. And if you say less black people are getting into the school and it's just because they're not doing as well on the test, well, no, actually, the test and the society are deeply imbalanced in subtle ways that are hard to recognize, so that Black people are disadvantaged. And all the markers you think are neutral are actually white structures in disguise. That's basically what critical race theory says. And then the version of critical race theory that seeps into, like these seminars and colleges and teachers' colleges and schools is basically the Robin DiAngelo watered down version of critical race theory that basically says, if you're a white person, you should never disagree with a Black person about race. Black people are always right about race. This is literally pretty much what Robin DiAngelo says. You have to defer to any Black person you're speaking to if the topic is racism. You are inherently racist by the fact that you are white and growing up in this country. You can't not be racist if you're a white person growing up in America. That's what she says. You basically just drink it in, with your mother's milk. And in that way, she said.
All right, and we're getting ready to answer this, and then we'll go ahead and close it down. Now, right at the beginning,
I want to answer my one too before we go. So we got about 20 minutes.
I'm gonna let you go.
Go ahead.
You gonna get a chance to say what you got to say. Right off the bat, everybody heard it. The critical race theory emerged in the context, and they were trying to move away from all of the things that Martin Luther King talked about. Martin Luther King was advocating for neoliberal colorblindness. Let me just read a couple of quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King. And you guys tell me if you sound like a critical race theorist. And these were the liberals that Dr. Martin Luther King is talking to. And I love when Malcolm X would handle liberals as well. It was astonishing. Think about Malcolm X. He was conservative. He believed in gun rights and all that good stuff. He would have been the perfect conservative. Nah, they didn't like Malcolm X. But let's just keep it real. On page 95 of Where Do We Go From Here? And this is why I said it's important to read everything that Dr. Martin Luther King said and wrote. Not a lot of people do. And even, even educated people push a certain narrative. Dr. Martin Luther King says the white liberal must affirm that absolute justice for the Negro simply means in an Aristotelian sense that the Negro must have his due. There is nothing abstract about this. It is as concrete as having a good job, a good education, a decent house, a share of power. A share of power. It is, however, important to understand that giving a man his due may often mean giving him special treatment. And this is Martin Luther King talking. Giving a man his due often means giving him special treatment. And we talking about Negroes. These are Black people. So much for colorblindness. I am aware of the fact that this has been a troublesome concept for many liberals, since it conflicts with their traditional ideal of equality and equal treatment of people according to their individual merits. But this is a day which demands new thinking and a reevaluation of old concepts. The society has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years, must now do something special for him in order to equip him to compete on a just and equal basis. How in the hell can Dr. Martin Luther King have been advocating for colorblind treatment? I just read what the man wrote. And Coleman Hughes says that, the folks who were propagating CRT were trying to move us away from Dr. Martin Luther King's colorblind ideals. And Coleman Hughes, I might respond to a presentation that he gave. He gave a presentation called Transracial Humanism, and he tried to use Dr. Martin Luther King to establish that transracial humanism. So I might do a point for point response to that. We'll see. But it's ignorant. He's right. Ignorance is the issue. It's ignorant to sit there and put words in Dr. Martin Luther King's mouth. And if you read Derek Bell, if you read most of the original critical race theorists, they were actually working within the same radical vein as the civil rights movement, because what was happening is after Lyndon B. Johnson got out of office, you have Richard Nixon, who is trying to undo many of the gains of the civil rights movement. And his first two targets were the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and also Brown versus the Board of Education. And so what we have to understand is the way that education is funded off of taxpayer dollars, right? Property taxes. Property taxes and the property values are based off of where places are located. Okay. We already know about redlining. We already know about how Black people basically couldn't even get money to repair their homes, let alone move into nicer neighborhoods. So the damage was done. The damage was done in many of these laws to get around integration. Is you had what was called white flight. White folks go to the suburbs, property values go up over there, property values go down over here. We so much for equality under the law, but it became increasingly hard to fight this because it was like, well, you know, this is not really an issue of race. This is an issue of class. But what about the history that led up to how property taxes were now being property values and property taxes were now being used to fund schools? What about that? So that's my first issue. One, Dr. Martin Luther King said way more, and I can read way more quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King. He's quite radical. If I just took time to read through some of his books, people gonna stop quoting that one thing from Dr. Martin Luther King. That has to stop. But the second issue is there's a conflation fallacy. Robin DiAngelo is not a critical race theorist. She's a Christopher Rufo theorist. Okay, and we can kind of tell that my boy is taking some of his cues from Christopher Rufo, who he used to work with. But I do expect a little bit better from Coleman Hughes, having a bachelor's degree in philosophy from an Ivy League school. I expect better. And so once again, I'm kind of questioning some things because Robin DiAngelo is doing her own thing. She's not doing critical race theory. She's not doing that. And so we got to have some type of academic integrity. We got to represent Dr. Martin Luther King right. And colorblind neoliberalism denies what would be called positive rights. And positive rights are those things that are due to people when they have been wronged. And such as the Bible recognizes positive rights for the poor, the widow, and the fatherless, and the oppressed, and the alien, I believe. And so this is not a political issue per se, far as an autonomous political ideology that man has constructed. No, for the Christian, this is a biblical issue when it comes to positive rights versus colorblind neoliberal negative rights and remedying wrongs that have been done in the past that still have cascading effects in the future or in the present. Excuse me. Go ahead, bro.
I don't have anything to say about CRT because you already know that's not my thing. I leave that to you and to Dr. McDermott and to also a Carpenter and Brandon. Y'all the guys that read up on CRT. I refuse to spend a penny on it and to for someone to impose, tell me how to spend my money. I don't need it. I got the Bible. So 105.14. I think that's where it starts off the question that I want to address before we get out of here.
105.14. Okay, 1 hour 5:14. Okay.
And racist. Two more questions for you, if that's all right. Imagine we are sitting in the same room. I'm on the West Coast, you're on the East Coast. And I said, Coleman, I have 100 marbles and I have 3 jars. I want you to divvy these up where you think the heart of the problem is on racial relations today in America. One jar would be society. Are there societal systemic problems? A second jar would be individual responsibility. And a third jar would be culture. Would you challenge those jars, add a jar, take one away? If not, where would you place those marbles as best you can, where the heart of the racial issues really lie today?
So if by racial issues, you mean the gaps in achievement, you mean the gaps in achievement between whites and blacks?
I think that'd be part of it, the gaps in achievement, and also just I think what I'm getting at is the different views that people have about why there's racism in America, which probably leads to inequity in the way you're describing it. And the 3 jars people are looking at in terms of how do we fix this inequity, which for the most part would probably be, some of this is attitudes, but some of this would be the way you describe it as well.
So I think that I would certainly put the vast majority of the marbles in the culture container. And when I say culture, I mean the norms and values that are the water you swim in as a kid and as an adolescent. You can put the same person in a culture where everyone they know has gone to college and expects them to go to college. Everyone they know comes from a home where there's no drug addicts, no drug dealers, people are employed. There's just a whole set of expectations you never even consider, you never even think twice about because they're so normal. And there's books in the home and everyone can read well. You take that same person, you put them in a scenario where no one they know has gone to college or aspires to go to college. Because again, all these other people have no models of anyone who's gone to college. People have kids at 18, 19, 20 years old. Everyone has someone close to them that is either on drugs or dealing drugs or one step removed from someone who's dealing drugs. You put the person in that environment, they become a very different person. And that's what I mean when I say culture. And okay, you might say, well, doesn't the systemic inequalities create the conditions, the ultimate reasons for those kind of behaviors? Well, maybe if you go back far enough. But the thing with cultures is that they're actually self-perpetuating. They have a that can outlast their initial causes.
The last thing that he said, maybe if you go back far enough, but cultures are self-perpetuating. That was his answer. So the question was, if I gave you the 3 buckets, the 100 marbles and the 3 buckets, where would you put the marbles as to what is continuing the problem of racism today? And he said he would put the vast majority of the marbles into the culture bucket. And then he goes on to explain how he rightly went on to explain how culture influences outcome. And he used the analogy of, if you took a person from a broken culture and stuck them into a healthy culture, they're more likely to reproduce. The culture is more likely to reproduce a healthy person than a broken person because it's the cultural influence. But he doesn't want. He wants to alleviate, or he doesn't see continuity between the culture and the environment that created the culture. He thinks that it's beyond the stage of external forces creating the culture that produces creating the environment that produces the culture. That's what he thinks. Okay, so hopefully that's that right. You guys, what I'm contending with right here. So I disagree with him. I don't think that we're beyond the point to where the external forces are creating an environment that is perpetuating the culture of which was created by the external forces. The culture, I believe that the culture that Black people have today, these negative aspects of it, was created by external forces, and it's continuing to be perpetuated from still by external forces. Here's one of the things that here's one of the groundings for this. This is a report. It's called Poverty, Income, Inequality, and Violent Meta-Analysis of Recent Aggregate Data. It's from 1993. It says in the late 90s, I'm gonna read an excerpt, in the late 1970s and early 80s, several important reviews of literature failed to establish a clear consensus of relationship between economic conditions and violent crime. The research presented here applies the procedures of meta-analysis of 34 aggregated data studies reporting on violent crime and income inequality. These studies reported a total of 6 zero-order correlations, coefficients for all measures of violent crime and either poverty or income inequality. Of the 76 coefficients, all but 2, or 97%, were positive of the positive coefficient. Words, it was 97% prove that there's a correlation between the environment and the outcomes. The environment and the outcomes. And the correlation was this: impoverished, when poverty is a factor in a person's experience, there's 76 other factors that usually, are implications of the fact that poverty is a part of the equation, a couple of which is violent crimes. Goes on to say that it is included that the poverty and income inequality are each associated with violent crime. The analysis, however, shows considerable variation in the estimated size of the relation and suggestion that homicide and assault may be more closely associated with poverty or income inequality than rape and murder. So in other words, homicide and are more clearly, of the 76 and the 90 that are proven to 7% accuracy, that the two most clear are homicide and violent crimes, more so than rape and robbery being proven of it. So why am I bringing up this study? We know that the legacy of racism in America is Black people being poor. That's not even a question. It's not even. I mean, there's a variety of factors that contribute to this. Up until the 70s, when with school integration, in the 70s is not all. So if you're 40 years old, you were born in the 70s, right? So that's the first generation of people who've had the opportunity to have, to some degree, the further back you go, less, the further out you get, the closer you get to today, more, actual equality in level footing to some degree, not 100%, not even equal to our white counterparts, but relatively equal enough for us to have it. And what do you see with this? You see a lot more parity. You see a lot more people within that age bracket who are in this, who are in the lower middle class bracket. You see a lot more of those people that are married and in two family households. Why? Because it's the first generation that has enough parity for the numbers to move the needle and get the numbers moving in the right direction. But the vast majority of people who aren't, the question would be, well, why aren't they? One of the major factors of the reason that they aren't is because they are living with a legacy of poverty, which produces the violent crimes that we complain about. When we're talking about Louisiana, we're talking about Detroit, we're talking about Chicago, we're talking about Black on Black crime, and we're talking about murder and things like this. Again, the environment, which was his point, reproduces the person. If you take that, you look at the movie The Blind Side, you took a poor homeless boy, took him out, got put in the upper middle class community. He ends up flourishing, becoming the NFL football player, and living a more flourishing life, getting married, following in the footsteps of the environment of which he was predominantly raised, right? So this is a part of the problem here. I don't understand how he could assume that the social conditions that the average that many Black persons today face, disproportionately Black people face today, are self-perpetuated. Like, their parents weren't permitted to buy houses. Their parents weren't permitted the same education. They were denied housing. If you just look at HUD is a division of the housing authority that was created because it was explicitly acknowledged that African Americans were being disenfranchised and not allowed to participate in the number one way that America acquired wealth: home ownership. If you go back to that's 1965 when HUD is established. You go back to 1990, go look up the Cisneros Camping Report. It's a 30-year review of housing, and guess what happened? Guess what that report reports? That racism prevailed. that in spite of the laws that were put in place to create equity and parity for African Americans to be able to buy a house, the rules were being broken. The money was being given to builders that were building houses that weren't selling houses to Black people, because continuing the problem of disenfranchising Black people, next generation of those Black people into poverty, and that poverty put them in cities like Chicago, put them in places like Maryland, put them in places like Detroit, Louisiana, places where all of their existence, they're going to see excessive murders. They're going to see excessive drugs selling as some hopeful path to get out of this nonsense, or drug use and sex, cheap therapeutic ways to escape the harsh environment that you live in. It's a self-perpetuating environment. The environment produces broken peoples. More whole environments produce more whole people. The broken environments were created. It was imposed upon these people. The Black, historically speaking, and again, when we're talking about history, we're not talking about that long ago. HUD, 1965 years later, they were still failing. 1995, that's not all that long ago, was it? School integration, 1970s, there's people, what's her name? Ruby Bridges? What's her name? The girl in Louisiana that was first person that was, the National Guard had to walk this girl, 6-year-old girl, into an elementary school. She's still alive. Today, she's still alive. That's not all of that long ago. So, it's not even talk about the history of the further back the history of these people that they're facing, and those same people that are telling their children how to survive in this world. Don't trust these people. Don't go here. Don't do this. Don't do that. Why? Because their experiences were persecution, exploitation, oppression. That was their experience. So they passed that down, sociologically speaking, by warning their kids and steering their kids in a direction that would protect them from these harsh experiences that they had. The environment that many of these African American people, these impoverished environments, it's not at a stage where it's predominantly self-perpetuated, and that's the problem. It's where the external forces created an environment, put a bunch of people in it, and now that environment has that environment produced a culture, and that culture is perpetuating and continue to perpetuate because of the external forces. They caused the problem. They don't want to be responsible for fixing it. And they want Black people who are in these environments that we know produce these types of people to be superhuman, to be superhuman, be impacted by their to have an attitude of perseverance. And I'm not saying that that's not a virtuous attitude to have. I'm simply saying it's unrealistic to expect these people to defy human nature. They shouldn't even have to. They didn't put themselves in the circumstances. This country and its laws, and then its blind eye to its citizens, disenfranchising and treating people the wrong way, is what caused this problem, and it's what perpetuates this problem. And until we see mass change, if you want to see these people get to a point to where they can get on the plan or on page where they're being more productive, you're gonna have to change. You're gonna have to have a mass change in their environment. That's what you're gonna have to have. A mass change in their environment. Those are the facts. That's the reality of the matter, right? They're right there. Now, I want to speak to the solution of it. Christian brother, Christian sister, me and you, we're the solution. We're the people that are supposed to be loving our neighbors as ourselves and giving these people, helping these people to see. And giving them hope is not patting them on the back and saying good luck. Giving them hope is not simply telling them go to school. Sometimes good luck is picking them up. Sometimes is giving them a meal, because part of them being distracted is the reality that belly, and that's distracting them, and that's making them want to go out and figure out a way to get some food in their belly. Sometimes is helping to buy them clothes because they're dealing with shame because their clothes are all tatty and everybody else has normal old clothes. It's that we have to change the environment that these people are in, and us changing this environment is in part, along with the verbal gospel message, the good news is Lord, is how people come to God. That's how people that's how people are drawn to God and come to know and begin to live the flourishing life, that life that abundant life, that life to the fullest. That's how they get. That's how they come to that. This is the solution. This is why God is rebuking Israel in the Old Testament for not caring for the widows in the Father chapter 1. This is why Jesus gives this parable of this king in Matthew 25, that when you were hungry, did you feed him? When you were naked, did you clothe them? When he was in prison, did you visit him? When he was sick, did you care for him? To the least of these people that you did this to me, because this is our mission. This is how we tell people in part that the king of righteousness, the king of glory, is worth surrendering your to, because he cares for us. Cast all our cares for him, for he cares for us. That's why Christian that just wants to solve problems by just giving lip service, by telling people do better, by pointing out the obvious, and and even worse, by ignoring the realities of how these people got into these sinful, broken conditions that continue to produce other broken people like them. If that's your idea of Christianity, then you reading the wrong book, or you're not reading the book, because our Bible tells us to do the exact opposite. It tells us to intervene. It tells us to step in, walk alongside these people, show them the right way, participate in them experience the right way, loving our neighbor as ourselves, using our time and our treasure to reflect our Lord's value as the people of his kingdom down here on earth. So if I don't get, I get Coleman Hughes. I get him seeing this the wrong way. He's an atheist. Got no North Star. Don't read the Bible. He doesn't have a Lord. He doesn't have someone telling him the right way to solve this problem. So all he has is his fact. He has is his human reason. And gosh darn it, he's trying to do his best to think his way out of it. But we Christians, us Christians, we got no excuse. The Bible is very clear. Jesus came to set the captives free. Luke chapter 4. To help the poor. Luke chapter 4. You know, that's what Jesus, he did to pronounce the acceptable year of the Lord, the year of Jubilee, desolation. That's what Jesus came to do. Jesus came to establish his kingdom down here on earth, and he left us, the citizens of his kingdom, here to live his kingdom values, and through living out these kingdom values to draw people to himself. And living out God's kingdom values is actually solving the very problem that, go figure. So SeanMcDowell, you on the other hand, you're a Christian brother. It's recognizing that it's paradigm, this message of the kingdom of God. It's these commands to live in a way that reflects Christ. This to not be overly consumed with these lexicons, to not be overly consumed with debating people and conversating with people over what's right and what's wrong, and actually doing something, putting our hands to the plow and making a difference, doing something. And along the way of us doing something, while we're loving our neighbor as ourselves, while we're helping, while we're taking care of that person that was beat up on the side of the road, the Good Samaritan. We're being the Good Samaritan. We're not the priest. We're not the Levite. We're the person who intervened and did something. And in intervening, told them, I'm intervening not because I'm gaining something out of this personally. I'm intervening because Jesus is Lord. My Lord has commanded me to intervene. And he wants to be your Lord. Arms with me. Join the community of God's people. Get to know your Lord and learn to reflect him as I am. I know that's a bit of a rant. It really frustrates me when we Christians get so wrapped up in talking about these problems that we lose sight of the fact that we're the solution to these problems. And I need to be less concerned with getting every detail of the problem right, much more concerned with, while I'm on that journey of figuring things out, that I'm never losing sight of the fact that I'm the solution. And the solution is not just philosophical or intellectual or propositional. The solution is practical. The solution is practical. So yeah, thanks.
That's a good word. On that note, want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We're at 2 hours 35 minutes. Once again, I always appreciate a good conversation, and I knew it was just a matter of time before Coleman Hughes stuck his head up in the Christian community. It never fails. It never fails. But like I said, I think the dude, he's a smart guy, but I think that his worldview is essentially useless for Christians, and I don't think that we should take our cues from folks in the world. I think that the revelation that God has given us is sufficient. It's sufficient to guide us. Like Chris says, this brother has no North Star. I'm gonna have to steal your quote. He has no North Star. And like I said, conversations are always good, but we can't rely on autonomous human wisdom. We have to lean not to our own understanding, but acknowledge God, and he'll direct our path. So with that being said, thank you, Brother Chris Brian Samuel, for joining me. Me and Chris will be coming back to you. We will have our years in review. Might even have to throw a few books at you. But before we go, I'm going to give y'all some homework if you want to. Right? So this book right here, More Than Just Race, by William Julius Wilson, it talks about a lot of the things that Chris Brian Samuel was talking about regarding how this culture or this culture was, in a sense, kind of created. The ghetto was created. It talks about certain things like that. It talks about how jobs or factory work disappeared from the Rust Belt, how factory work disappeared from Philadelphia and wound up in the suburbs and things like that. It talks about those type of structural issues and how outside forces were pressing in on the African American community. So I think that'll be a good book. William Julius Wilson is a top-notch scholar. And then check this out, the Anatomy of Racial Inequality. You'll actually like what's in there, and it's factual. And even though Dr. Glenn Lowry has kind of changed his tune a little bit, he still stands by that work that he put forth in that Harvard classic book. So just want to say thank you, Chris Brian Samuel. Sorry that it took so long for me. It's my fault. Chris Brian Samuel is always ready to ride, but sorry that it took me so long to get back in the groove. But we'll try to make sure we bring y'all something next week, and be on the lookout, because we'll both probably be on other people's channel as well. But till then, peace.